Welcome to Question Time, which tonight comes from Edinburgh. And with us on our panel, the Conservative Home Office Minister, Ben Wallace, the SNP Home Affairs spokesperson, Joanna, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, the Financial Times columnist and editor of Money Week magazine, Merryn, Somerset, Webb, and the actor who campaigned for Scottish independence in 2014, David Hayman. Thank you. Thank you very much, and just remember at home you've got Twitter and Facebook at your disposal. Our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us by searching for BBC Question Time. If you want to text 83981, press the red button to see what others are saying. Right, let's get going. Our first question from Eric Holford, please. Eric Holford.
Is the leaked Labour manifesto an attempt to drag Britain back to the nightmare that was the 70s?
Emily Thornberry.
I think that this manifesto is one which is about the transformation of Britain. It's about the 21st century. It's not looking backwards. It's actually looking at what options do we want? We have a choice now with this general election. We can be a better country. We can be a country where we don't need to have nurses going to food banks anymore, where we have a national health service that has sufficient funds, where elderly women have a visitor in the morning from social care that will get them up, at breakfast time instead of having to wait until lunchtime. We will have young people who won't necessarily be saddled with debt because they've been to university. We will have chances for young people to be able to move out of their homes and to be able to move into their own homes instead. We'll have a world where if you get a job in the city, you're not afraid of having to pay all that money that you're having to pay at the moment to private train companies, frankly, quite often owned by other countries. And we will have a train service which is owned by Britain instead. There is a choice, there is another way. And the question is, in this election, do we want to do that? Or do we want to carry on with a tired old Tory party that has run out of ideas completely?
I take it from what you say that it was accurate, the leak that came out. That is the manifesto, without the money.
Well, no. What it was that it was an earlier draft. In fact, I think it was a couple of.
Were you there today when it was?
I was there. I was there today.
Changed much?
There was the leak was a couple of earlier drafts actually,
and obviously.
Well, it had been changed quite a lot before we even went to the meeting today.
So there are things we don't know that are in it.
And then there was obviously what we do. I mean, we're a democratic party. I mean, we're not like Theresa May, who'll go into a locked room with some friends and draft the manifesto up themselves and not talk to anybody.
I don't want to compare manifestos. I'm just trying to check the veracity
and all I'm saying is that we're a
done.
democratic party, and obviously in those circumstances, when you consult a lot of people, you might get somebody who, for whatever reason, thinks that it's somehow clever to draft some sort of to leak some sort of early draft unnecessarily. The manifesto will be launched. I'm not saying it's 100 miles away from the manifesto that you will see, but it's not word for word.
And have you costed it today? Were you costing it?
We were costing it today, and there's still more work being done, we were perfecting it today.
Ben Wallace.
Well, I think if we put aside the sort of chaotic way that a government in waiting sort of handled the manifesto launch or the non-launch, we put aside the fact that the leader doesn't actually agree with some of the issues in it, such as nuclear and Trident, and we put aside the background that actually the government and the country is still living £57 billion out of its means. We are still in deficit, 57 billion. We've brought it down from 157 billion, and we have to remain on course to start living within our means. If we put all those aside and ask ourselves whether this manifesto is affordable and whether this manifesto will actually deliver the stability and the economy that this country needs to get through the next 5 years, I think the answer is a resounding no. I think, I represent a seat in Lancashire. Some of the commitments in that manifesto will put out of work the thousands of aerospace workers in my constituency and indeed in the west of Scotland by the clear antipathy towards aerospace and our manufacturing industry that it is. Absolutely. If you ban aerospace sales, let me tell you, Emily.
Banning aerospace
yes, you are. You're going to ban it to Saudi Arabia.
No.
No, it is. And you are going to ban it further. Hang on, you know, Jeremy Corbyn has a strong, long-held antipathy towards the aerospace industry, and it is absolutely clear that what's going to happen is this manifesto will risk Britain's stability. It is completely uncosted. Emily talks about there's some more work being done. They're busy outgrowing the money tree to try and make up the money.
That's not right.
It's billions of pounds, and I think we're in a position where if this manifesto goes ahead, and if Labour won the next election, we would find our economy would crash, we would go back to the state of the 1970s, the trade unions would be in the front door. Now, Emily talks about whether the Prime Minister makes up the manifesto with a few friends behind closed doors. The trade union barons have been in, writing the cheques and getting what they want in this manifesto, and it risks enterprise, it risks business, and it risks aspiration of people in this country who are trying to make our economy stronger.
David Hayman.
When the Labour Party came out last week and announced one of the first of their initiatives, which was let's give everyone 4 bank holidays per year, my reaction was, dear Lord in heaven, that is not going to set the heather on fire. I genuinely welcome this initiative by the Labour Party. It has put the cat amongst the pigeons. I think it's genuinely exciting because it's going to give the people of the United Kingdom a proper choice. Now, I imagine I get the feeling the questioner is against it. He said, I don't want to go back to the 70s. Let us not forget that every single one of us in this room, our parents, our grandparents, we paid, our taxes paid for the construction of the rail network in this country. It paid for the electricity grid. It paid for the gas supplies. It paid for the Royal Mail. Suddenly, Margaret Thatcher comes along in the 80s and said, oh, let's sell them all. So she sold them off to all her friends, who made an absolute fortune out of our investments. And it's about time we brought it back into our management. If Holland can do it, if Germany and France and Spain and other countries in Europe can run their own systems, why cannot we?
Okay.
It is absolutely certain.
I'm old enough to remember the 70s just. I was young by then. I remember when we had trains that were dirty, smelly, and couldn't run on time at all. Well, I remember the times when we had unions that would bring down our government, our democratically elected government. I remember the winter discontent. I remember the 3-day weeks, the power strikes, and all of these things. And I don't want to see us go back into that. You say it's a tired old Tory government, but it's a Tory government that brought us out of that and gave us a strong economy.
Sorry, you go on.
Too far now, I think. Now you're saying now we've gone too far. Yeah. Look at the NHS and everything. Now we've gone. Now we've gone right. We've got, I believe, privatisation, rail fares, I believe, roughly about 383% increase. Yeah. Since private, that's 380. You worked that out.
What about nurses in food banks? My daughter's a nurse, 26 years old. She earns 50% over the national average wage.
Yeah.
She is a perfectly good.
That's one person.
Okay,
I'm talking about other people.
Eric speak.
She's a nurse like any other nurse.
But not all
she
nurses
goes to work
same.
and she gets paid. Yes, she works hard, she does a good job, she cares for people, but she gets well paid for doing it as well. She lives in a nice flat, a nice little car, she lives a nice life.
And everyone's like that. Every nurse is the same, are they? You're generalising.
But it's certainly possible.
So you're generalising.
No, I'm being specific.
Okay, you two, let's come back to the panel. Joanna Cherry, no, thank you very much.
Well, I think it's a real shame that the Labour manifesto has been leaked in this way, because it has enabled the media to focus relentlessly on the Labour manifesto for the whole day, rather than the real issue in this election, which should be the record of the Tory government at Westminster. What this election should be about is whether you want the hard Brexit that Theresa May is going to deliver and the effect that will have on jobs and the economy. And this election should also be about the Tories' record on austerity, the fact that, as people in the audience have already said, low-income families are having to rely on food banks, disabled people are having their mobility cars taken away from them, and hard-working, low-income families now have to cope with the cap on child tax.
Can you address
tax
Eric
credits.
Holford's question there, which is about, well, his question was whether the Labour manifesto specifically is dragging Britain back to the 70s.
There are many things in this manifesto which I welcome because they reflect SNP policies that are already in place in Scotland, such as no tuition fees, free school meals and votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. And I agree with David. If other countries in Europe can have their rail systems nationalised and can run efficiently, as all of us have experienced when we travel on the continent, why can't Britain's? But I think the real issue about this leak is somebody inside the Labour Party has done this, and it shows how divided and chaotic they really are.
The motive being what, do you think?
Well, many of the MPs don't support the policies that are in this manifesto. Take Trident, for example.
What do you think the motive is, if you say it's been deliberately leaked?
I suspect the motive is by somebody on the right of the Labour Party to further undermine Corbyn. But that's just my suspicion.
OK, but in fact it's drawn attention to it, hasn't it?
But the reality is that many of the policies in this manifesto are not supported by the Parliamentary Labour Party. Equally, Trident renewal is in the manifesto. Emily doesn't support Trident renewal, and the Scottish Labour Party voted against Trident renewal. So what this illustrates is the chaos and division in the Labour Party.
The woman here.
I just wanted to make the point about the railways. Yes. In terms of my understanding is that the railway companies, the private ones, receive 4 times as much funding as the ones as British Rail did in the 1970s and 80s. And these private companies receive that subsidy, and then a lot of these are actually offshore companies. So Virgin is registered in the Virgin Islands.
You want the railways nationalised, renationalised?
Absolutely.
Yes?
And joined up so that when you buy a ticket in one place, you can just get a ticket right through. You don't get different prices.
Is that the most popular policy in what's come out today for you?
Well, actually, the main policy about protecting the most vulnerable people, because the UN has already identified that the welfare policies are an aggressive policy that takes away the rights of disabled people.
OK, Merryn, Somerset, Webb.
Well, Emily's vision of the future is absolutely gorgeous. And what I like most about what you said this evening is the idea that there is more in this manifesto, because this list is so long, tens and tens and tens and tens of things, all of which are incredibly expensive, and all of which are things that most people would like. Everybody would like everybody to be rich. Everybody would like everybody to be happy. Everybody would like everybody to go to university for free. And everybody would like everyone to have a gorgeous NHS that treated everyone on the most expensive drugs available. However, the slight problem is the money. We still have an enormous national debt, 1.8 trillion on it. We are adding to it at the tune of over $1 billion a week. We have a deficit that is still running at 4%. We have, we run up this debt constantly. It keeps going. We are not anywhere near balancing the books. And what we have here is billions and billions and billions of extra spending, which may well be costed. I mean, I can't for the life of me imagine how, given that on the way the country runs at the moment, we're running a deficit, how this could be costed, I can't imagine. The few bits that have come out so far, we will pay for free school meals, being one of the examples. Free school meals will be paid for by VAT on private school fees. Now, that may work, but what you don't know, of course, is how many people will stop sending their children to private school when they have to pay VAT. So these things are very difficult to cost, and I think, looking around the audience, I think we're all old enough to have seen quite a few political cycles come and go, and we've seen what happens when politicians cost things. It never, ever works out. The deficit goes up and up and up. So at some point, someone has to say, everything on this list has to be paid for, and almost none of it is affordable. And one more thing I will pick up, Joanna, I just want to pick up on the free tuition business, because this is very, very important. And we do have free university tuition in Scotland for Scottish and EU students, obviously not English students, but Scottish and EU students. And we have found here that it doesn't work in the way that we would hope it would, i.e. it doesn't reduce educational inequality. So if you come from a wealthy family in Scotland, you are 3.5 times more likely to apply to university through the UCAS system than if you are a disadvantaged
student. So you're suggesting
in the UK,
tuition fees.
In the UK,
you're suggesting we should reintroduce tuition fees so that people can be more equal.
I'm in the middle of a sentence, David. I'm in the middle of a sentence.
She's picking you up on what you're saying.
I haven't finished my sentence.
You can take an intervention.
In England, it is 2.5 times. In England, it is 2.5 times where there are tuition fees, and we have seen applications.
What is 2.5 times what?
Oh, wealthy to disadvantaged. You're 2.5 times more likely to apply if you are wealthy in the UK in England than disadvantaged. In Scotland, it's 3.5 times. So what we're seeing here is that the policy of free tuition has not had the desired results.
Okay,
and that really matters.
Can I just say, there's one simple answer. There's one very simple answer to how we pay for this. Let us scrap Trident and the renewal of it. That will release something like £100 billion over 3 years. Let us sell the ridiculous aircraft carriers we've built at the cost of £3 billion. We can't even afford the aircraft to go on them.
OK, just before I come to the gentleman there,
simple.
Ben Wallace, if we scrapped Trident and sold aircraft carriers, would that pay for what Emily Thornberry has been describing, in your view?
No, half of it won't even come close. I mean, let's take an example. One of the pledges is to nationalise National Grid. Right? The UK proportion of National Grid is valued at about £23 billion. And this is the sort of bankruptcy of this manifesto, the longest P45, I think, is going to be issued to people in history, which is that I can think of a lot more places I would spend £23 billion than an ideological crusade to renationalise National Grid. You know, what is the priority? The priority here is not ideology, and it's not, as Tony Blair said, the politics of the protest. The priority here is getting outcomes for the people of the United Kingdom, making sure they get access to the universities if they apply. And by the way, because of the tuition fees policy that currently now exists in Scotland, the SNP had to cover the cost by cutting 157,000 places at colleges across Scotland.
True.
It is true, and it's your own statistic.
Well, now, hold on.
So it's not ideology, it's about delivering for the people of this country. And this manifesto is about Jeremy Corbyn indulging in ideology no matter what the cost.
I will come to you. Emily Thornberry, I will come to you in a moment.
Thank
Emily.
you. I don't really know where to start.
Well,
OK.
you've got the manifesto,
Oh, right.
and
How about
Eric's
this?
question, just to remind you,
Yeah, OK.
is dragging Britain back to the 70s. That's
So
the main point.
there's been lots of kind of quite wild allegations made. And what I would say is that the last general election, what we said to the Conservatives, because they kind of said the same thing then, before they adopted a lot of our policies, was they said, you know, oh, it isn't affordable and everything else.
Oh, so
and
they've adopted your policies.
Well, they've adopted...
They're crypto Labour, are they?
Well, sometimes, if you look at the energy one, and then you look at and you compare it with what Ed Miliband was saying, you think, well, what's the difference here?
So you don't have a problem with the Tories?
Oh, no, we've gone further than the previous manifesto in relation to energy, because what we're saying now is we're saying, actually, we won't cap it. What we'll do is we'll set up an alternative energy company in each region, and that will be able to challenge these private companies. But let me just come back to this point, because it's what I want to say. So what we said at the last general election, we said, you're saying that we can't afford it. There's this organisation called the Office of Budget Responsibility. They're independent. And what we want you to do is you want you to give them your manifesto and our manifesto, and they're independent, and they can see whose sums add up. And do you know what? The Tories said no. And so this time round, we've said, I'll tell you what, this time you're going to say the same, you know, we're going to make the same ridiculous allegations. Let us give you our manifesto and the Tory manifesto, and let the Office of Budget Responsibility look at it and see whose sums make up. Now, the question, Ben, is why won't you let us do that? Because you're just going to carry on saying these things. We want an independent body to look at our manifesto and your manifesto and look at the sums.
But Emily,
why are you saying no?
Emily,
well,
Emily, unless I'm wrong, there are other organisations like the Institute for Fiscal Studies who have looked at your costings and who say, for instance, that you'll raise less revenue by putting corporation tax up in the long run because people won't invest. I mean, there are people looking at what you're saying.
Well, the question about corporation tax is, first of all, the Tory government want to cut corporation tax. We already have one of the lowest corporation tax rate of the G7, and what we're saying is that we will raise it. We will not have that cut, and we will raise it, but we won't be making it any higher than any other of the countries in the G7 area, and that will raise a large amount of money that we can pay for a national education service, and that will help companies because they'll have better qualified and more productive staff as a result.
All right, I want to go to our audience for a bit because we've heard a good deal from... Yes, you up there.
Yeah, there just seems to be this myth about national debt as a percentage of GDP. Somehow the Labour programme is unaffordable, but after the Second World War, the national debt as a percentage of the GDP was over 200%.
Yeah.
Now it's under 100%. If Attlee could afford to create the National Health Service, then the welfare state, all the institutions we so love, then the Corbyn's Labour government can easily afford to build the council houses and to create the National Investment Bank.
The
increase the national debt?
The question of the national debt after the Second World War is a really interesting and very important one, because that is the last time that we did have our national debt at a level anywhere near equivalent to where we are now. Now, try and remember how we ran that debt up. By having a vast war. We ran that debt up by killing a lot of people. Once you stop killing people, you can run the debt down. At the moment, we have an enormous debt, largely because we spend a vast amount of money on keeping people alive. Now, we don't want to stop doing that, do we?
Nobody says what's the problem.
So it doesn't run away in the same way.
You can run the debt. Why can't you just have a bigger
well, how
debt?
about 8% of our tax revenue at the moment? 8% of tax revenue is spent on servicing our debt.
Anything wrong with that? Anything wrong with that?
Well, it's not spent on anything else, is it? So, you know, people
yeah,
out
but
there...
you get the money from the debt, as he said.
People out there working, paying taxes, know that this large percentage of what they pay goes straight into paying interest.
Joanna Cherry, you in favour of the national debt going up or down?
Well, I think the point the gentleman in the audience makes is a very interesting one. But of course, what we need to remember is that there's this myth has grown up that in some way the Tories can be trusted on the economy. The Tories have missed all their own targets on the debt, deficit and borrowing. And Emily makes a very good point when she says the Tories won't put their manifesto to be looked at by the Office of Budget Responsibility. I can tell you why that is. Because their manifesto, when we eventually see it, is going to revolve around their plans for a hard Brexit. And we know that they have made absolutely no economic assessment whatsoever of the consequences of a hard Brexit. We know that because David Davies told us.
Okay. The man in the... I'll take a couple more points here. The man in the check shirt on the edge there, you.
Is Germany stuck in the 1970s? Because this manifesto doesn't seem to be pushing to the left of Germany. It remains to the right of Germany. So how is Germany stuck in the 70s?
Ben, can you take that point?
Well, I think Germany doesn't carry the weight of debt or deficit that we do, and we should all be concerned that we should continue the direction of living within our means. It is absolutely...
Taxes and giving away to billionaires and not collecting taxes from transnational corporations.
The biggest expenditure a government spends after things like the NHS and pensions, the fifth biggest expenditure, it's not education, it's not transport, it's not the police, it's debt interest on the national debt. It's £46 billion of money I can't spend, or nor can anybody else spend, on all those goodies that some people think are in the Labour manifesto. We have to live within our means, and we have to continue to do that. And I'm afraid to say, you know, that the government's record on the economy is strong. The government's record has created 2.8 million. Well, you might laugh. It's 2.8 million pounds. I mean, unless Emily wants us to cut the debt even faster, we have reduced the deficit
by 100 billion. I want you to give up on the politics of austerity. That's what I want you to do. Your idea has just not worked over the last 7 years.
One at a time, please.
All I'm saying is that I want you to stop the politics of austerity, where ordinary working people have to continue to have their services cut in order to be able to pay the debt. And guess what's happening to the debt? The debt continues to go up because we have to borrow to invest in order to get our economy going. That's the point. We cannot just go on like this. We're flatlining.
Okay. Emily wants us to go back to the days when Dennis Healey gets called back from the airport by the IMF to balance that, because their relationship with debt is carry on spending.
Got nothing to do with Dennis Healey.
Someone else will keep spending. That's the reality, and we can't get away from the record.
The woman up there at the very back. No, the woman behind you there, yes.
We need to raise taxes. We need to raise corporation tax. We need to raise taxes. And all parties say, we'll raise higher taxes for people who earn 80,000 or more. That is not even going to get anywhere close. Half of us don't even earn just over 20-odd grand, never mind 80. We need to be raising taxes for people who are earning 35, 40,000, never mind 80.
You want a huge wave of tax increases?
General population will pay more tax as long as it goes back into certain things like the NHS and things like that. Okay. We would pay more taxes, but saying that we're going to raise taxes over £80,000 or more.
Okay, and you, sir, in the third row here.
I find it very curious that whenever anybody announces any policies that are remotely progressive, that the right always say, where is the money coming from? But I find it very hypocritical that the money is always found to bail out the banks, it's always found to start wars, and it's always found to give tax breaks and start illegal wars abroad. That's when the coffers spill open. But don't let's feed poor children with free school meals. That's heresy.
Okay. I want to move on. We've got more questions. I'll just come back to you, Eric. You asked the question. What do you make of what you've heard?
I'll say one last thing. You talked about free tuition in university. That's great. Back in the 1970s, tuition was free and you got a nice healthy grant. But we only had 5% of children going to university. Now our aspiration is for at least 10 times that proportion. And in Scotland, we find it's limited by the number of free places that are available, and they now have to bring in foreign students and English students who will pay the fees in order to keep our universities open. And at the meantime, we lose more places in colleges than we have in total for Scottish students in university.
If you make something free, you have to rationalise.
Okay. Right, well, we've given the Labour manifesto, the leak of the Labour manifesto, an airing. Though no doubt we'll be having it in more detail, and with its costings later on, we'll be able to go into that. Just before we go on to another question, I should tell you that we're in Norwich next week, and the week after that in Belfast. And then I particularly want to draw attention to two special question times. The first is in York on Friday, not the usual Thursday, the 2nd of June, where a question time audience will put questions to the Prime Minister and to Jeremy Corbyn, not, however, at the same time. And then on Sunday, the 4th of June, Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP and Tim Farron for the Liberal Democrats, and that will be here in Edinburgh. So there's two extra programmes on the Friday and the Sunday, the 4th of June. The details on the screen there, if you want to come, and I'll give them at the end in more detail. But let's now move on to another question. This one from Paul Goodall, please. Paul Goodall.
Will a Conservative advance across Scotland halt a second independence referendum?
Conservative advance across Scotland, which we saw in the local elections, will it halt a second independence referendum by halting the SNP? David Hayman, what did you make of the local elections and the effect on Scotland if it's carried through into a general election?
Well, last week was extraordinary. I think the people of Scotland were laughing themselves silly. The fact is, SNP increased their vote by something like 108,000 people. They increased their seats by 6. They are the largest party in 4 of Scotland's largest cities, and they won Glasgow. I think for a government that has been in power for 10 years, that's an extraordinary statement coming from the people of Scotland. If you read any of the unionist press, it was like a landslide for the Tories, and the nail was firmly in the coffin of independence. Here's hoping. I wish you all the best. I do not think the momentum for independence in this country has been stopped at all.
Conservatives gained 164 seats, didn't they?
Yes, but they took them from Labour. The overall numbers between Labour and the Tories have stayed much the same. The overall numbers for the SNP have risen. So they have just lost them from Labour.
They lost 7 seats, SNP, no?
We gained 6.
Gained 6.
SNP gained 6.
There's a dispute about it, apparently. Anyway, Merryn, Somerset, Webb, do you think this rise of the Conservatives will affect an independence referendum? Repeat?
Well, I know not many people agree with them, but I'm still not 100% sure that there ever will be another independence referendum. You know, that it's a long time before we get to the end of the Brexit debate, and it may well be that Scotland decides that it doesn't want to do that. So it's not a given at all. But what is interesting about the resurgence of the Tories in Scotland is that it is, I think, partly about the Tory party itself, partly about having a good leader, but it's partly about the fact that Scottish politics has become something pretty unpleasant, which is just a division between people who are unionists and people who are not unionists, so pro-union, anti-union. And so we have people voting for the SNP who are anti-union, and then we have people who are now collating around the Tories as the unionist party. And this is a terribly sad situation because you have people not necessarily voting for party successes and party policies, but voting on constitutional issues. And you know, we see this in the Scottish Parliament, where so much time is devoted to talking about constitutional issues and not enough time is devoted to talking about other things. Very little legislation passed. I think it's become a very sad thing. And when I look at, you know, I know, for example, that Joanna and David very much want independence, and I know that, well, I assume because other SNP politicians tell us that they very much want independence, they must want it. But if I were, say, Joanna, or say an SNP leader, one of the things that I would be doing would be trying to build a great country, a great place, so that people would want to have the thing that I'm offering. I would build it and wait for them to come, rather than go on about it relentlessly and try and kick them into coming along with me. So, I think we've come to a sad state in Scottish politics, and I'm glad to see a unionist resurgence reflected in the Tory party, but I wish it didn't have to happen this way.
Joanna Cherry.
Well, I think, as David has already very eloquently said, rumours of a huge Tory revival have been greatly exaggerated. The real story of last week's local elections was that Scotland was the only place in the United Kingdom where the Tories were firmly beaten into a distant second place. But it's clear that the Tories are replacing Labour as the second party in Scotland. But as I go out in the doorsteps of Edinburgh South West, I'm coming across a very interesting phenomenon whereby former Labour voters are saying that they want to lend me their vote to stop the Tories from taking the seat. Because, of course, what this election is really about is about who will stand up to the Tories at Westminster, who will be a strong voice for Scotland at Westminster. And what voters in Scotland have to decide is, do they want a strong voice, such as that provided by me and my colleagues over the last 2 years, or do they want just another Tory backbencher who will simply rubber stamp all of Theresa May's plans for austerity and a hard Brexit? But to take the independence question on the chin, this general election is not about whether there will be a second independence referendum. Of course, it's important that people in Scotland have a choice at the end of the 18-month period after the triggering of Article 50, a choice between a hard Brexit and an independent Scotland. And the Scottish Parliament has already voted that people in Scotland should have that choice. And polling shows that people in Scotland believe it should be up to the Scottish Parliament whether or not we have a second independence referendum. This second independence referendum hasn't just come out of a void. It's come as a result of Scotland facing being dragged out of the European Union against her will. Now, people like Merryn, who were active in the No campaign during the last general election, made a promise to Scots that the only way to guarantee our EU citizenship was to vote to remain part of the United Kingdom. That promise has been broken. So, of course, Scots should be given a choice when the time is right. But, of course, the issue in this general election is, do you want to give Theresa May a thumping majority so she can do whatever she likes without any scrutiny, or do you want strong voices that will stand up? And in Scotland, those strong voices that will stand up against Theresa May are the SNP.
Okay. The woman in the middle there with spectacles, yes. A bit further down. There you are, in the middle there. Yes.
I would just like to disagree with what Merryn said about politics in Scotland being negative. I think there's a massive thirst for social justice here. Yeah. And for the Labour Party manifesto, I think is very, very welcome. Unfortunately, I'd be interested to know what you think about this, Emily. The Labour Party has positioned itself in Scotland as a vote for Labour being a vote against independence. I feel really torn down the middle. I'd love to vote for Labour, but I really don't know what to do.
But you want to vote for independence, you mean?
Yeah.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, I'm afraid, and I have to be straight with you, a vote for Labour is not a vote for independence. We believe in a united kingdom, and we don't think that it's in the interest of Scottish people to become independent. We think that you will end up with supercharged austerity as a result of it. We think that it is to the advantage of all of us to remain united. And we think that a vote for Labour is a vote against austerity. You will either get a Labour government or a Conservative government. There is no alternative than those two. And if you want to stand up to the Tories, if you want to fight austerity, you vote Labour. And we get some Labour MPs from Scotland in Parliament standing up to the Tories, or alternatively being part of a Labour government. Okay. And that's the choice. And the SNP want to place themselves as the only alternative to the Tories, but that simply isn't true. And a vote for Labour is a vote for, to stopping the divisive politics. Okay. Stopping the divisive politics in Scotland and stopping divisive politics across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Let her come back on it.
Yeah,
you can come back on it.
Sorry, I feel like you're missing my point, which is I feel like my vote for Labour would be hijacked as a vote against another independence referendum. And it's not that. It's a vote for Labour. It's a vote for the Labour Party manifesto, which I totally agree with. I think it's
why
about time.
Why can't you vote for the SNP if you want independence? What stops
the
you?
SNP is not the party I'd like to vote for. I think the Labour Party's manifesto, from what I've heard of it so far, is more radical. It gives me more hope.
All right. And you say here.
The SNP policy appears to be let's have a vote and vote again until they get the result that they like. What happens if it's a 50%? What happens if it's a 50% plus one in a future referendum for independence? Do we get a chance to vote the other way again? The politics of referenda is just so divisive, and it has to come to an end.
Well, both Brexit and independence.
The thing's been done.
Referendum you're
the
against.
thing has been done. It has divided families. It has divided communities. It has done nobody any good.
Okay.
The politicians are elected to take decisions on our behalf, and they hand it back to us. And well, we've made a bit of a mess of it, haven't we? We've just divided ourselves against ourselves.
Ben Wallace.
Well, I was elected to the Scottish Parliament in 1999. You can imagine what it was like being a Tory in 1999 Scotland. It was, there weren't many of us. But things have changed. And one of the reasons it's changed, the Scottish Parliament was an exciting, dynamic place. The Labour Party, the SNP, the Greens. You know, Donald Dewar was the First Minister. Alex Salmon was leading the party. It was full of ideas for how to run Scotland, how to fix social issues, make some difference to people's lives. And I think what I'm sort of disappointed by is that has transitioned away from that under Nicola Sturgeon to an obsession about independence at all costs. It is about, it's about not doing the day job. It's all about how can we manoeuvre for another referendum. My father came from Fife, a Labour stronghold, where it stood for social justice, it stood for social mobility and education. Right? Education is what Scotland is known around the world for. Well, I'm afraid under Nicola Sturgeon we saw the literacy rates only this week. It has been a disaster because Nicola Sturgeon can only focus on independence. The day job is being neglected, and whatever your politics are, Ruth Davidson is providing a solution to do that. No one knows what Labour stands for anymore in Scotland, and it's either the SNP or it's Ruth Davidson, and she has done a fantastic job in making sure that you may laugh, but the people of Scotland are already showing that they agree that they want to put people in Parliament and the Scottish Parliament to deliver policies that make a difference to their life every day, not indulge in referendum.
Can I ask you a question? Why was the Tory leaflet put through my door on last week's local government elections all about independence or not? It was all about the constitutional issue. Nothing at all with local government. And yet, the leaflet I got from the SNP had a detailed programme of what they wanted to do in local government.
Well, I wasn't out canvassing of the local governments in Scotland, I have to say. But I think, the choice is clear. Look at the figures, the day job. The SNP, Scottish Parliament, had a lot of extra powers since I first arrived. They can use them in all sorts of ways, imaginatively if they wanted to. They could put up the taxes, if some people would like, if they wanted to.
All right.
But it's not about that. I'm afraid it's about independence, and all of us can go hang.
Person in brown there with spectacles, you. Yes.
How can the Conservative Party tell Nicola Sturgeon that she's not getting on with the day job when they themselves aren't getting the day job done when they're calling a general election?
Okay, let's go somebody else. You, sir, in the middle there, yes.
Yeah, it was just in response to what Emily said. This lady, voiced her concerns about the Labour Party and why she can't support them. And your answer was, to paraphrase, we think that it's wrong for the Scottish people. I'd like to say that that's exactly the kind of attitude that's got you into this sorry state of affairs that you're in now in Scotland.
Okay. Right, I'm going to go on. I want to take a question from Amelia Dole, please. Amelia Dole.
As a young person, why should I find the UK an attractive place to live after Brexit?
What do you think, actually, yourself?
What do I think?
Yes.
Well, I mean, as a student, I'm quite worried about universities how they're funded, and also schemes like Erasmus and losing them.
So you're worried about the way that the vote went?
Yes.
Merryn.
Well, it's an interesting one. I speak to a lot of students who are really worried about all sorts of things that I kind of suspect they shouldn't be worried about. Because, you know, we've got a long time now, 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years, maybe 5 years ahead of us to arrange how we will be leaving the European Union and to make transition arrangements. And I suspect that most of the things that you're worried about won't change at all during that period, and probably won't change at all beyond it. You know, we had arrangements with universities in Europe long before we were in the EU, and the, you know, things like Erasmus, etc., may well continue. You'll still be able to study abroad in exactly the same way that my mother went to university in France in the 60s, and that was before the European Union. All these things will continue. I don't imagine there will be any difference in terms of freedom of movement if you're not working. If you are working, there will be differences that will come under various
A young person becomes a
middle-aged,
becomes an older person, and she'll become an older person, become a middle-aged person, have a family and all that. What's attractive about Brexit?
What's attractive about Brexit? Well, I think one of the things that is attractive about it is going to, I hope, make the UK a much more successful economy in the long term. It makes us much more outward-looking. It makes us able to make free trade arrangements around the world. It allows us to take a leadership role in global free trade, which is very important. We'll be able to sit on the WTO and talk about global free trade in a way that we can't inside the European Union, because it's a very protectionist organisation. I would say something quite interesting about European politics. You know, over the last year or so, there's been a great sense of relief in Europe because the so-called populists haven't gained control in any countries, haven't won any elections. So I quite often hear people saying, you know, the UK has become a place I don't want to live. It's, you know, it's anti-immigration, it's fascist, it's this, it's that, because it's changed because of Brexit. But A, I don't think this is true, and B, if you look across to Europe, you see dynamics that are maybe more frightening. You know, can you have imagined 34% of the UK voting for UKIP? I don't think so. But you saw 34% of France voting for Le Pen. Same in Holland and in Austria.
They can vote for Theresa May.
Same in Holland and in Austria.
Okay.
I knew you were going to say that. I know Joanna's going to say that. How could I have her all? So, you know, I think that in political terms, the UK is just as liberal and pleasant a place to live as it always has been. Right. And I think that in economic terms and in global freedom terms, you will find that your life unfolds in a pretty good way.
Thank you. Emily Thornberry, do you think the UK will be as attractive a place to live after Brexit?
I think that it all depends on how we do the deal. I think that there are many, many choices that we need to make. And I don't think that it starts well if you begin by having just come back from seeing the Queen and standing on the steps of number 10 Downing Street and accusing those who you're supposed to be coming to an agreement with of plotting against Britain and wanting to bring down the government and affect the elections, etc., etc. Once you say those things, they can't be unsaid. And what concerns me is that at the moment we seem to be arguing about what it is that we're supposed to be discussing. This is 10 months after the referendum. I'm very worried that this Prime Minister does not seem to understand that the first priority for any government is the safety and security of its citizens, but the second priority must be the economy, and particularly those who are just starting out in life, who've been well educated, who have done their best, who've done their best at school, who are setting out in life, and the world turns around and says, actually, no, not at the moment. No, sorry, we're going through Brexit. There aren't any jobs at the moment. There aren't any opportunities.
Emily,
that really frightens me. Yeah. And we should be thinking, every Prime Minister until now has thought the economy is a priority. And yet our current Prime Minister seems to be more interested in whether we're leaving the European Court of Justice or not, and how much she can insult the people who we're supposed to be negotiating with, instead of looking after our economy and the future of our kids.
Do you have an answer to the question Jeremy Corbyn didn't quite answer? Under Labour, would we inevitably leave the EU?
Listen, we've had a referendum, and the referendum was a serious thing. We went out and we said to people, look, think about this very carefully.
We want you to... That wasn't my question. Sorry, we've been through all that. Okay. The question is, would we, under Labour, inevitably leave the EU?
Given that we've had a referendum and the public have told us that they want to leave, then we have to leave. And the question then is, how do we do it? Okay. And what kind of continuing relationship do we have? Right. And how close do we remain close to the European Union in order to make sure that we look after our economy? And that is the question.
Thank
and
you.
The way we're going at the moment, we're going to have either no deal or a hard Brexit.
Joanna Cherry. I'll come to you in a second.
I'll just remind Emily that actually in Scotland, 62% of people voted to remain part of the European Union.
But the United
So what's your answer to...
My answer to the young woman's
Amelia.
question is that I don't think the United Kingdom will be an attractive place for a young person to live after Brexit. And I'll tell you why. Let's start with the universities. I've got two major universities in my constituency. Heriot-Watt has already announced redundancies and cuts, citing Brexit and the effect of the Tory government's immigration policies. I speak to academics and students at these two universities, the other one's Napier, the whole time. They tell me they're deeply worried about research funding, they're worried about Erasmus, they're worried about students not wanting to come to study in Scotland and the United Kingdom, and they're worried about academics from the European Union turning down job offers because they're unsure about the position of EU nationals.
The university is the most important point to you?
No, universities are not the most important point.
What's the most important?
The most important point is jobs in the economy. And the Fraser of Allender Institutes have told us that if there's a hard Brexit, Scotland will, over the next decade, lose 80,000 jobs, and on average our wages will be £2,000 lower per annum. Again, not attractive for a young person. Now, Emily, you're absolutely right that other parts of the UK voted to leave the European Union. The Scottish Government...
The UK as a whole voted to leave the European Union. That is the point. And we are democrats at the end of the day, and a United Kingdom has made a decision, and we should abide by our instructions.
Well, if you just let me develop the point. The Scottish Government put forward a compromise proposal which would have benefited the whole of the United Kingdom. And it was that the whole of the UK should stay in the single market, because it wasn't clear in the debate around the referendum that even all leavers wanted to leave the single market. So we advocated that the whole of the UK should stay in the single market, which failing at least Scotland. And those proposals, despite having support across the board in Europe and support from leading academics such as Sir David Edward, the former European Court of Justice judge, they were binned by the Tories without being considered
at all. Let me put that to Ben Wallace. You were in favour of Remain, weren't you?
Yes.
You're not in favour of Brexit at all.
Just like being a unionist, I was in favour of free movement of people and barrier free trade with our partners in England. That's why I'm a unionist in the United Kingdom. Look, whether pre and post Brexit, the United Kingdom will be a great place to live because it is a wonderful country which is full of diverse, different cultures. It's a powerful economy, whatever way you cut it, in the world. We live, all of us, in some of the highest living standards on earth compared to many other people. We are a civilised, educated, multilingual often nowadays country, and I am proud to live in it.
But Joanna Cherry says that Scotland will lose 80,000 votes and people will be £2,000 a year worse off.
Well, I think, Joanna Cherry, we need to see the outcome of the negotiations. You know, Joanna Cherry forgets that 1 million people in Scotland voted for Brexit. And the other thing that the SNP make the mistake is a large number of people that voted Remain were not nationalists. They were unionists, and a number of people that voted Brexit were actually nationalists. One of her own MSPs voted to Brexit. The reality is the United Kingdom has wonderful opportunities. We will be able to work, I think, in many parts of Europe and the rest of the world. There will be other opportunities that will come along if others don't, in other parts of the world, because we will be freer in some areas we haven't been in the past. And I think we have a great future. And Britain has the power and the people to make a great future for this country. Right. So I don't think anyone should worry, and I definitely don't think people should talk down this country, Emily, about whether or not it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be okay. We are going to get there, and in the long term, I believe some great...
Well,
I know, because I believe in the British people.
The man on the corner there.
Yes, I worry that the arrogance coming out of Ben Wallace and the Conservative Party might actually cost the UK dearly. There's no guarantee that we will be better off outside the European Union. The UK may be a prosperous country now, but that may not necessarily continue to exist. It's worth remembering that Glasgow was once the second city of the empire, and now 40% of people live below the poverty line there.
But why do you think that the Tories in government will be held responsible for that? Because whoever's in government, according to Emily Thornberry, would be negotiating Brexit, because that was what the referendum decided.
Yes, yeah, true. But I think the sort of discourse coming out of the Conservative Party has been leaning much further to a hard Brexit than what Keir Starmer is talking about, for example. And there has to be a point at which you say the cost of leaving the European Union is greater than the potential. Yeah, the cost of leaving is not as good as the benefits we have if we were to stay.
David Hayman.
Amelia, I'm really glad that a young person asked this question. I think my generation have made a mess of this world. And the future is... And for people of my generation, the future no longer belongs to us. The future is yours. You have a vision. It's interesting that 76% of retired people in Scotland voted against independence. The majority of people who voted for Brexit are elderly people. You voted not to leave Europe because you're internationalist in outlook. We currently have something like just under 4 million young people in this country live below the poverty line. If that's how it is at the moment, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse after we've left Europe altogether, because the conditions will not be to your advantage in any way at all. Now, I run a humanitarian organisation, and I run projects in some of the poorest countries in the world, like Afghanistan and Malawi and Palestine. There we're feeding people, we're educating kids, we're setting up women's training workshops. And they turn to me and they say, David, we look at you with envy. You live in the 6th richest country in the world. You must have no poverty, no desperation. And I laugh. And I tell them the fact that we have 4 million children who live below the poverty line. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to starve to death. It means they will go to sleep at night in unheated rooms with nothing in their bellies. They will never get a birthday present. They will never get a Christmas present. No one will ever buy them an ice cream. No one will ever take them to see Star Wars. There is a poverty of opportunity for young people in this country, and I think because of Brexit, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse.
Okay. I'll come to you, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
What is this assumption that Brexit is bad and should be held up? Scottish independence is good because it brings lots of benefits. If we voted for Scottish independence and it was held up by people like some of the panel here, what would you think of that, Joanne? People saying, well, we didn't really want independence. If it went 52-48, we didn't really want independence. This should be scrutinised in the Scottish Parliament. It should be debated by all parties, and maybe we should have another...
Well, this comes back.
How's it different?
I'll answer your question by coming back to what I said earlier. Was that the Scottish Government proposed a compromise which would have united some of the people who voted to leave with those who voted to remain by proposing staying in the single market, and that's never been seriously looked at. Now, Keir Starmer, for whom I have a great degree of admiration, produced 6 red lines recently, which are tantamount to staying in the single market. But I'm afraid it was closing the stable door after the horse had bolted, because the Labour Party had voted to trigger Article 50. Now, the issues around the implications of leaving the European Union were not properly debated during the EU referendum, and many lies were told. Thank you. Many lies were told by members of the Leave campaign, who are now cabinet ministers. This general election is all about scrutinising.
Do you want to rerun the referendum?
No, I don't want a rerun of the referendum. I want the British government to respect the fact that people in Scotland voted to remain, and at the very least to look at the compromise proposal that was put forward, rather than treating it with the derision with which it has been met.
You, sir.
I really must take issue with Ben claiming that after Brexit Britain is going to be OK. When did OK just become enough?
There is this assumption that those people within Europe, it's automatically going to be better off than the United Kingdom. You know, if you are a young Spanish person under the age of 25 who is facing nearly 50% unemployment, you may be asking yourself, actually, whether the European Union is working for you. If you're a Greek who is finding it particularly hard to get through life, you may be asking yourself whether the European Union is actually all it's up to be for them. And there's this assumption that by leaving, somehow we're automatically going to be worse off, and that it's guaranteed that if you stay in the European Union, everything's going to be fine. You know, there is poverty in the European Union, David. There's poverty in nearly every country in the European Union. It doesn't disappear if you join the EU.
Can you answer the point that Joanna Cherry made? Why has nobody given serious thought to the idea of remaining in the single market?
Well, I can answer that. I can
Emily's in the
answer
government.
that.
Emily's in the government.
I can answer that.
Why is she better to answer it than you?
Because I'm Shadow
you,
Forest.
you can answer it. I don't mind who answers it. She made the point. Somebody answered.
She's the shadow.
We've looked at this. We've looked at it very carefully in the Labour Party, and the difficulty is that because we're not Spain, we're not Greece. We have a highly developed, complicated, large economy, and there is great difficulty in us remaining in the single market and leaving the European Union because our economy is so complex. We do need to have our own free trade agreement, that nothing else will work. We have looked into this, and it is to the advantage of Britain, therefore, to have a free trade agreement, but one that works for our economy first and foremost. And can I just say this? I'm fed up of Conservatives telling us that because we're worried about the way in which they're proceeding with these so-called negotiations, that we're somehow or other not patriotic. How dare they? We are really worried about this country, and we want to make sure that we get the best deal for this country, and that means the best deal for our economy so that youngsters get a chance.
You sit up there on the gangway.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on something that David Hayman was saying. I understood that you were, I don't doubt the sincerity with which you said it, and I do agree with much of what you were saying, but I must speak up as I'm 27, I don't know if that makes me a young person or not. But
me, yeah.
You have to speed up to be 28 by the time the programme ends.
Indeed. I voted to leave the European Union, and I resent the implication that automatically by voting to leave, I'm not internationalist and outward-looking. The world isn't just Europe. We're stagnating here. There's austerity being imposed on people far beyond anything Westminster is doing. There are parts of the world, parts of the Commonwealth, India, New Zealand, that we abandoned at the creation of the European Union that we should be engaging with. And there are horizons beyond the edge of Europe. And some of us on the Leave side, thank you very much, are internationalist and outward-looking.
OK. I can't... David, I can't invite you to answer because our time is up, I'm afraid. Unless you want to answer. I'm told you can answer, because we've got a bit more time than we thought. David.
It came into my head, a quote from one of my great heroes, no longer with us. One of the great spiritual and moral and political leaders of the 20th century was Nelson Mandela. And he said two things that always ring true with me. He said, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, but the difference we make to the lives of others. The second thing he said was, overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it is an act of justice.
Does that answer your point?
That wasn't a direct answer to you.
Okay, fair enough. I was going to say that's admirable, and I've not said anything that disagrees with that.
OK. We have to stop, I'm afraid. Our time's up. Now, just where Question Time goes to next. It's Norwich next week. It's Belfast the week after that. And remember those special programmes I mentioned halfway at the beginning of the programme. Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn separately with a Question Time audience in York on Friday the 2nd of June. Chance to question Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition. And then Nicola Sturgeon and Tim Farron Sunday the 4th of June here in Edinburgh. So if you want to quiz the party leaders, details of how to apply are there on the screen now. You can go to our website or you can call 0330 123 99 88. If you're listening on 5 Live to this, the debate goes on Question Time Extra Time. My thanks to this panel and to all of you who came to Edinburgh to take part. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.